Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today at Wigtown Book Festival. I'm Polly Puller, and firstly, I'd like to thank all our generous supporters and sponsors. Life continues to be extremely uncertain, and we're going to need fine writing and good books more than ever to keep us sane. So if you feel able to donate to the festival too, to ease our passage into the future, we will, of course, be extremely grateful. Now, I'm really delighted to be here to chat to the wonderful Esther Woolfson, whose first book, Corvus, A Life with Birds, and in particular, a now world-famous rook called Chicken, explored the ways in which we as humans connect and relate to other species. Her second book, Field Notes from a Hidden City, examined our attitudes towards species that some might consider mundane, yet are far, far from it. Today, we're going to be chatting about her latest work, and then there'll hopefully be a chance for questions. Between Light and Storm, How We Live with Other Species is an extraordinary, revealing, and often shocking book, unveiling our long history and relationship with the animal kingdom through art, culture, fur farming, vivisection, the industrialization of livestock, and the drivers behind the game industry. And so much more. It also reveals the different ways in which we treat our pets, showing too that fine line between love and cruelty. It's a groundbreaking and life-changing book, and I can't help feeling that it should be read by every policymaker and politician everywhere, and certainly by all of us. So now please join me in giving Esther a really warm welcome. Hello, Esther. How are you today?
Very well, thank you so much. That was so kind of you. I'm really glad to know that you like the book.
It is. It's a most extraordinary book. And I wondered if you might like to just start by giving us a brief overview of the story behind it and what it's about.
Certainly. I started writing about other species when I wrote Corvus. And I really, I did not know very much about anything except my relationship with the creatures that I knew. And I suppose it was that because I was starting from the beginning and realizing the capacities of other species that I began to question everything about how we live with other creatures. And then I wrote Field Notes, which was about, I include slugs and rats and generally reviled creatures. And then I started to think about why it is we hold the attitudes that we do towards other creatures. And that involved going right back to the beginning to really examine the philosophy and history, and also how we came to the sorry path that we're in at the moment, where we have this massive species loss, massive environmental destruction. What allowed it to happen? And the book, as it deals with all these questions. What is it that gives us permission to treat other species as badly as we do? And what gives us permission to destroy them and to cause them to become extinct? And what is it that is preventing us from stopping doing what we've done so far? I don't know if I've managed to answer any of it, but I've certainly tried to find out.
I think you really have. I was very interested, particularly that from the very, very beginning, it was extremely clear that we have always seen ourselves as superior beings, haven't we?
That's
right from the start.
Well, that's right. And that was something that I was very interested in, the idea of, what makes us think that we are so superior? We have not really been around for that long. And I mean, I'm talking particularly about Western culture and the Western roots of our ideas, which go back to the Egyptians, and particularly to the Western religions and the idea of ourselves in the image of God, the possession of souls. All these things are major determinants in how we later dealt with other species. There are differences in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, but there is this overriding feeling or overriding idea that we are superior. And the idea of what's called human exceptionalism, means that we are special, has determined everything that we've done towards other species. And it's an idea that is very, very difficult to change. I don't think for a second that we're exceptional, but the people, I mean, it tends to now to be a quasi-religious idea that, you know, the God-given right to believe in ourselves. But it dies very, very hard indeed. While I was writing the book, one of the very prestigious scientific magazines in America had an edition about why are we so special? And I thought to myself, if even scientists are saying we are not particularly special, we are a species among others. We can do things that other species can't. Other species can do things that we can't. But it is this sense of entitlement that has been so destructive.
I mean, I think that is very clear throughout your book, this sense of entitlement. And when you're studying all the different cultures, all the different religions that you've already mentioned, it seems to be an overriding theme for everyone, doesn't it? That
yeah.
It comes across so strongly, and it's very shocking.
Oh, it's particular. This is quite a difficult one to talk about. Both Judaism and Islam have got ideas about how you treat other species. Both of them have rules and laws about you do this, you don't do that, about cruelty and about the correct treatment of animals, which Christianity doesn't. So there was a very, very interesting paper published in, I think, 1967, I actually got it here, by an American historian called Lynn T. White, called The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. And this, I mean, it's actually astonishing. It's a long time ago. And he was a churchman himself. And he wrote, despite Copernicus, all our cosmos rotates around our little globe. Despite Darwin, we are not, in our hearts, part of the natural process. We are superior to nature, contemptuous of it, willing to use it for our slightest whim.
I think that sums it up.
It is a wonderful paper, and you know, people have obviously criticized it, but those words just haunted me all through the book. Everything I came across, you know, our attitude to, you know, the taking of selfies with other creatures, people traveling across the world to take selfies of, you know, take pictures of themselves holding a sloth. You think that for the slightest whim, that exemplifies it.
Well, I mean, I have a photograph of myself taken in a department store at the age of about 5 or 6, clutching a chimpanzee. You know, and that would have been,
yes.
You know, I'm sure you probably had sort of similar things happen. And that is horrifying now, isn't it? That thought that, you know,
that's right.
You have a whim, but it continues with this sort of people like the influencers who will be photographed with something and then put it on Twitter. Right. It's a horrible side to us, isn't it? Really, why do we want to do that?
Well, again, it is, I mean, and it's funny, all these sort of themes that just kept running through every topic, the commodification of other species. I mean, you know, the Adam Smith idea, what did he call? He called creatures unmanufactured commodities, or I think it was farm animals. And that really is the way we look at a lot of other species, factory farming, the fur trade. So many ways in which we do it. They are, and I mean, you know, I'm an old cynic, but you know, you look back at the the religious ideas behind it, and you think, oh yeah, it suits people very well if they enjoy going hunting to say, oh well, we can do that because it doesn't cause them any harm. They don't have souls, so it doesn't matter.
That's something that I was very keen to explore more with you, this idea that animals don't have feelings and don't have souls. I mean,
Yes.
That is just extraordinary. And you speak quite a lot about that in the book.
That's right. Because that seems to be the one, when you trace it back, that seems to be the, they don't have souls, they don't have reason, they don't have language. But, okay, you can, people didn't know very much about, the cognitive abilities of animals, although you could, if you used a bit of common sense, you could possibly have interpreted some animal behavior as being, as proving that they were cognitively able. But the one thing that, you cannot prove is the soul. So, if a churchman said, Augustine or somebody, St. Augustine said, they don't have souls, that gave permission to do, for us to do anything.
I was quite shocked by some of the saints. So St. Augustine, who you've just mentioned,
yeah.
I mean, they all behaved in a very unsaintly manner because, they would hear animals crying and just take no notice of it. That's not to me very saintly.
Oh, that's right. That was Descartes, Nicholas Malebranche, who, Descartes was, from the species, Descartes was generally a bad thing, to put it at its mildest. And his follower, Nicholas Malebranche, said something about animals cry without feeling, they eat without knowing. It just, a continuation of the, the Descartes' idea of the animal machine. They were insensate, you could do anything. And to prove it, he is said to have kicked a pregnant dog, who yelped, and this was to prove that, I don't know what it was meant to prove that he was right, which of course he wasn't. But no, Descartes' influence was malign.
I mean, you must have found it incredibly harrowing researching a lot of this, because, you've obviously done a massive amount of research. How long did it take?
It took me 4 years.
Well,
4 years. I thought it was, I think I kind of discussed it with my editor, it was going to be 2 years, and then it kind of, but I couldn't have done it in any less. No, it was, some of it, I did have, spells of feeling, extremely grim, because it's just, you think, how can people do this?
I know. Which brings me to the vivisection side of the book, when you cover that in quite a lot of detail. And I suppose I knew it always went on and there had been this kind of thing, but I was deeply shocked by a lot of it, just by the fact that all these experiments, a lot of them, they took place when the animals were still living.
That's right. There was, at the time that they were done, very little else. And it, again, I try not to be too prescriptive about it. I am trying to present a situation. This happened, and at the same time, I was looking at some of the things that were learned through early, 18th, 19th century vivisection, and a lot was. And, one cannot turn one's back on that. And a lot of, I followed up quite a few of the people who were most prominent, or who had come under the scrutiny of the 19th century anti-vivisection movement. And some of them did extraordinary work. There were obviously hideously cruel experiments, but there were a lot of gains for humanity. And I don't know what to do with that knowledge. I really don't. It's,
It must be really difficult, because that knowledge is very troubling. It's troubling knowledge, isn't it? And how do you
very
do
much, very much so. But we know, and there's nothing that we can do now. But what I do find very difficult is that some of these experiments are still done. Things like, there's one absolutely disgusting one called the behavioral swim test, where rats are basically thrown into water and left to swim around, sometimes for days, until they despair and die. And anyone who can do that to another creature, especially, rats are wonderful. Rats are I have known many rats personally, and they're fascinating and intelligent and all the rest of it. Anyone who can do that to a rat has got to be appallingly sadistic.
Yeah, I think so. And that's the Harlow test of monkeys, the Harlow monkeys.
Oh, God,
maternal attachment. I mean, that was extraordinarily unpleasant.
That's a fascinating one, because so many people still talk about this as, this wonderful, revelation about maternal instinct and so on. He was an absolutely monstrous little man. He was terrible. He was absolutely vile. He was a terrific misogynist. He was incredibly crass in the way he expressed himself, and monstrously cruel. People kind of, talk about the wire mother, but there were other experiments that were viciously cruel.
So they separated these young monkeys, the capuchin monkeys, and
that's right. And yes, and there was a piece of equipment, basically a sort of metal tank, and they used to put a little monkey, baby monkey in there, and basically leave it until it, went until whatever. They were terrible, and they forcibly mated these creatures. And Harlow used to make jokes about his rape rack. I mean, he was
he's a very sick, almost a psychopath, really.
Yes, I thought so.
Sociopath or something.
That's right. And a lot of his reasons for his experiments, it was actually to prove that women were not needed. And there was. And he also talks in his in one paper about women replacing the American man in the workplace. There was a lot of very doubtful social experimentation there, but people still say, "Oh, look at him. He was such a wonderful researcher."
But I mean, you of all people know so well about the mothering instinct, because when you've hand-reared your birds, you know that they bond to you. And in a way, okay, they're not seeing you as, well, they are seeing you as your mother, aren't they? I mean, you're the one that has reared them and looked after them. And that's so right. That must have been very troubling to read that about the monkeys, because to try and take them away from their mother and try and get them to be normal and have normal behavior without all that mother instinct at the beginning. Possible.
It was just a terrible. Of course, a lot of experiments were done that would not be done now, wouldn't be allowed now. But a lot are. That was another shocking thing, that some of the experiments. In fact, Jane Goodall wrote something not so long ago about they discovered some appalling lab in Germany, and she wrote very, very critically of it. Indeed, these things should not be done.
No. I thought of you yesterday because I read something that was quite optimistic for a change, something in the newspaper yesterday, which said that they've now managed to manufacture this fake human skin.
Yes.
That they can do all these tests on, and it was going to lessen all the need for animal testing. And I thought, gosh, that's really fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of work being done, and a lot of organisations. There's an organisation called the Dr. Hadwin Trust that works on trying to find alternatives. I mean, there are alternatives, but one terribly sad thing I read recently was that since the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of lab animals have had to be put down because people can't work and they can't look after them and so on. And researchers talking about how heartbreaking. Yeah, I bet it is.
Do you think that those animals, if they were rehomed, do you think those ones that have lived those extraordinary weird lives that are so unnormal, so unnatural, do you think they would ever settle and be all right?
Well, I suppose it depends what was done to that. It would depend very much. Somebody gave one of my daughters a rat that had been experimented on, and he was a nice rat, but rather unrattish, rather sort of timid. He couldn't wash himself properly, which is very unratty. I mean, rats are, maniacal self-cleaners, and he was a bit sort of hopeless. And he died very suddenly. Usually, we're quite used to seeing rats kind of living out their 1,000 days and dying. But this one was quite young, and we didn't know what had been done to him. So I suppose it depends.
Really horrible. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the industrialization of farm animals, because that's something that probably affects all of us very much today, really. And, you know, people are vegan or vegetarian or meat eaters. And you uncovered quite a lot of things about the factory farming that many people.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go into it in enormous detail, but the bit, you know, what I did was, you know, quite shocking enough, and just the size of some of the they're called in America, they're called CAFOs, these huge farms, and the way animals are treated is quite appalling. Poultry, that is another one. I mean, they're just dreadful. There are reports every day in the papers about how shockingly these creatures are treated. Now, you are talking about, and pigs as well, you are talking about cognitively able creatures with memory, creatures. And it is the strange idea that we can do, it goes right back to, we can do anything. Why? Well, because we can, and we do. And it doesn't, well, look at the effects.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. I think at the moment, you know, people there's a horrible argument going on, isn't there, that's very heated between vegetarians or vegans and meat eaters. Yeah. And it's very nasty. And I think that's a real shame, because, I mean, everybody's entitled to do what they want. But from my point of view, meat eating, I'm happy to eat meat that I know where it's come from and I know if it's had a happy life. How can I say that? What I mean is, if it's some, you know, locally produced meat, and you know it hasn't gone through these systems. But a lot of people, a lot of farmers probably have no conception of what happens to their animals when they leave their farms.
Well, that's right. But a particularly interesting set of arguments that I came across was from an Australian philosopher called Val Plumwood, who, she's now dead, but she wrote incredibly interestingly about these issues. And she was rather opposed to veganism because she said it took you outside the natural world. And, you know, that realizing that, you know, there is death and killing in the natural world. And it was turning your back on that to a degree. And she talked about ecological animalism, which meant mostly vegetarian way of life, but she was taking into account indigenous ways of life that rely on meat eating and so on. And I thought that those were very extremely interesting arguments and discussions.
Yes. I think, you know, the thing is that many farmers never go to the abattoir, so they don't know what happens. I mean, I've been into an abattoir, you know, when we were producing lots of lamb, and it was one of the most uncomfortable experiences ever. But I felt that in order to carry on doing that, I needed to know what the whole process was. No, because otherwise I couldn't really live with myself. But we sold direct to that abattoir and didn't. I have a huge issue with the live transportation of animals crammed into logs. That's just terrific. But it's funny, as I've got older and we're eating less and less meat and getting more, you know, I think it's come to our attention more about the bad treatment of animals and the chemicals being pumped into them.
It's the enormous scale of production and of killing and again, land use and all the rest of it, you know, the effects on climate and on the earth. It cannot, well, we say it can't continue, but it does, you know.
It does go on. Yeah, but you cover that brilliantly, because you do talk a lot about all those aspects, and to bring all that together was extraordinary, really, in one book. I think it's quite incredible how you've done it. But you really must have got quite exhausted mentally, emotionally, with dealing with all these subjects, because they are very, very depressing and very black.
Oh, they are horrible. One of the things that I've tried to do, but also have been, you know, they've been very obvious throughout the book, is the connection between what we do to other humans and what we do to animals. So I've never, you know, you can never really separate them. And in fact, it's in Jacques Derrida's book, the The Animal That Therefore I Am, it's a very interesting book, and kind of stemmed from this encounter he had where his cat came and looked at him when he was naked in his bathroom. Yeah. And the kind of the immediacy of this made him think about relationships with animals and so on. And along the short, he wrote a series of lectures that was then published as a book. And it's it's quite, in bits very difficult to understand and very difficult to work out. But one of the images in that book just haunted me, which was he was talking about what we do to animals and factory farming and so on. And he was saying, imagine that we did that to people. Imagine that in concentration camps, people were bred to be tortured again and again. And if you extrapolate from animal to human, it is so horrifying. It really is. And again, when I was talking about vivisection, examples from concentration camps, but these things have happened in many places where we have experimented on other humans. Manchuria, and it's happened in the States, it's happened here. And we cannot separate. It's something that interests me a great deal, the separation, the lines of separation between species. Where do they lie? Where do they fall? How have we managed to create these differences, and where we can treat one living thing in one way and another we're prevented from by law? I don't understand it.
Yeah, it's a very good example with your lovely corvids, your crows that you love so much.
Yes.
Where they are, many of them are treated as this horrible word, vermin.
Vermin, that's right.
Foxes are vermin, and yet a pine marten is supposedly protected and not vermin,
that's
but
right.
Yet behaves in the same way and does the same sort of things. So what is it that makes us choose one as a good and one as bad? And it's a very strange thing.
That's right. And the cultural background is so vast. The language we use so much influences how we look at other species. The books we read as children, I've got a chapter about museums, which is really about the iconography. It's about how we learn about animals. It includes language as well. The idea that a lot of people in Western society learned about animals and about ethnography, or about other people from going to see displays in museums. And quite often, if you examine these things, they're very, very disturbing now. A lot of museums are now thinking, how can we deal with our past? A lot of it very colonial, and there is a horrible, horrible legacy of our cultural attitudes being determined by what we saw as children.
Yes, I'm sure. Extraordinary. And one of the things I found intriguing was, and I hadn't stopped to think about it, was when you mentioned the word tradition. And when we ask certain people about something that's unpleasant that should be banned or should be stopped, they say it's tradition. It is traditional to continue that. Therefore, it's okay. That's fascinating, isn't it? That word is used as a cloak, isn't it? All the time.
Yeah, that's right. I'm particularly sort of, I come from one of these, a tradition of traditions, where the Jews are very, very keen on tradition. And it makes me think all the time, is that just a cover up for something you want to do, or is it really tradition? I saw in one of the papers yesterday something that is absolutely repulsive, which is something that is done by only ultra-Orthodox Jews round about Rosh Hashanah, which it is at the moment. It's actually the eve of Yom Kippur today. For some reason, they take chickens and whirl them around their heads, live chickens. I think it is in order to expiate sins. Well, why you might do that when Jewish law says that you're not allowed to be cruel to creatures, so why you would commit a sin in order to expect. I really don't understand, but it's terrible. And they say it's a tradition. It's not actually in law, in Jewish law anywhere. It's just something that somebody did and they carried on doing it. And it's not even that old. It only goes back a few hundred years, which in our terms, there's nothing wrong. And you think, stop it. Why are you doing this? I mean, there's so many things. Every culture, every religion seems to have some bit of total mania about, we can do this because it's tradition.
I think it's time we got rid of all these things. It's time we moved on and we realised.
Well, if they're cruel and vile, absolutely, totally. I mean, we have come to this terrible moment when we're destroying species, hand over fist, and yet we think it's all right to do these crazy things. I mean, another of the things that really sort of came home to me when I was writing the book is, it's, they're cruel a lot of practices are very cruel to animals. Well, they don't do much good to humanity either. No. The effects are extremely bad on children seeing these things, how people are brought up, how they behave towards other species. It's not good.
And the children seem to just emulate their parents, don't they, really? They tend to, if their house has been full of that sort of thing, then they will take that as being acceptable. If it's acceptable to kick the dog, then they'll probably they'll kick their dog and their adults. And so it goes on.
That's right. There was another thing that was very depressing, was the, I think it's in the final chapter I write about, the kind of cruelty that goes on in households, the way that I'm talking about pets and the role of pets and how pets are used as pawns sometimes in preventing women from leaving violent partners. Women are unable to leave because they can't take the pet with them, and if they stay, they're subject to violence. And I mean, there's a huge amount of research about this, and it's extremely distressing. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence about children who are brought up in situations of violence and violence towards animals continue this throughout their lives. And it is deeply depressing.
And leads on to terrible, far worse things.
Yeah, no, it can do.
What is far worse? I think before we get off the nasty subjects, I think we should just discuss a wee bit about fur farming, because
a
very big section in your book. And I mean, some of those things that happen when are really awful, when a business is shut down and they just move. Could you explain about these foreign businesses with fur farming?
It's a fascinating thing, because I mean, I sort of tended to think fur. Fur's over. People aren't using fur, and fur farming has fortunately been banned in Britain for ages. And I mean, I write about it in the book. Passed a woman one day wearing this, long fur coat. Very unusual sight here. I see a lot of people wearing fur. I mean, you used to, in the 80s, if you travelled anywhere, you'd see people in America wearing fur. But, I was sure it was over. And when I saw her, I thought, I must look into this, and discovered that I was an idiot. I should have known it goes on a huge scale. And, Denmark's one of the centres of fur farming in Europe. And places are banning, countries ban it, and you just move your fur farms somewhere else. You can, they're all over the place, all over Europe, there are fur farms. In the United States and South America, all over the place. And in fact, I was having a look the other day and discovered that today there's a big fur auction going on in Copenhagen. Fur is the kind of centre for the fur trade. Enormous numbers of skins being traded. And you look at their website, and these fashion garments. It's happening, and it might not be Gucci. I don't know who has stopped selling fur, but somebody's buying it and somebody's making it, and it is a huge industry, and it is monstrously cruel because these creatures are kept in extremely small cages. The CEO of the European fur industry was asked at a House of Commons committee about the size of a cage for a fur animal, and then was asked about the size of it was for a fox, and she didn't know what the size of the fox. So she didn't know that this creature was crammed. I mean, she must have known, but is crammed into a cage that is far too small. The fur industry say the animals are domesticated. There is a lot of question about what that actually means, but in the end, it doesn't matter a damn whether or not they're domesticated. They are kept in vile conditions, and they're killed in a vile way. And it's a disgusting trade.
Yeah, I was interested in, you had a lovely quote from yourself, which was, "On the day I consider I require moral judgment, I will not be seeking it from the fur trade."
Exactly, yes.
I mean, you managed also very cleverly to bring in a lot of humor into your book, even if it's when you're writing some cynical descriptions of things. Now, I particularly enjoyed some of your description of the game shooting fraternity and some of the fripperies that go along with that. I couldn't help giggling, and it came at a very good moment. You're very good at balancing this very serious issue with there's light moments that just keep you going on, and it's very excellent. So could you tell us a little bit about that, because I found that highly entertaining?
Yes, the game shooting is very interesting, and particularly at the moment, there's been a lot in the news about it for various reasons. But something that absolutely fascinated me, apart from why people would actually choose to do that, was everything, this whole culture that surrounds it. And I do recommend that people should look at the websites of some of the really high-end gun sellers and so on. They're absolutely riveting. I mean, the amounts of money that is spent, £250,000 on a gun, easily. But it's the kind of culture, you give each other presents. You send a present to the person who's hosted your shoot, and astonishing items. So many of them are made of silver, or scrimshaw, or mammoth ivory handled knives. So many of them are actually made in the image of the creatures that people have just shot. So they go out. I mean, they import 27 million pheasants and partridge. That's the latest estimate that I've seen of the numbers imported, factory farmed, sent out to be shot, and of course, that has this enormous effect on local wildlife and so on. But having done this, a lot of these creatures aren't even picked up and eaten. They're shoved into pits to rot. And then the people who have shot them give each other presents of silver pheasants and, £20,000 watch with a picture of the pheasant on the face, and absolutely ghastly things. And I think to myself, do these people have no sense of irony? Well, clearly they don't. It's ghastly, but...
You really had a very good take on it. The other thing, Esther, that I so enjoyed, and actually I really agree 100% on this, is that as humans we keep using two words, iconic and charismatic, to describe animals, and both of them are just, to me, totally wrong, and it's so commonplace now for people to do that.
That's right. And the problem with that is that again, it's in my final chapter is called "What is Love?" I'm questioning all our attitudes to pets and our love for other creatures, and of course, people give money to conservation efforts for creatures that look nice, which means that the ones that don't look nice, who are equally valuable and equally important, and so are ignored. And part of this, if you look at any website of any conservation organization, charismatic, iconic, another word that absolutely drives me crazy is cute. I'm not immune to cute. I have sent pictures of cute rats to my daughters who are, magpies or something. But it is this the kind of reductionism of it, and the fact that we will put ourselves out in some way for something that's cute, but not for a vulture or whatever. It's just, there was a study done a few years ago about the likability of garden birds, and that just and it matters apparently because we will feed the ones we like and we won't feed the ones we don't like. We don't like the ones that we think behave badly. They behave like wild birds, mainly corvids and starlings, and you think, what does it come to when we're judging other species by these pathetically narrow, stupid criteria? I don't know. I really find it difficult.
Do you think our lives would change if we rethought our whole relationship with the natural kingdom and animals and birds? Do you think everything would fall into place better if we could sort that out?
I think that a lot of people would be very shocked if they actually realised or thought or considered that other species have consciousness. I think that the animal rights philosopher Tom Regan had a lovely phrase. He talked about other species as being biological entities, biographical entities, meaning that they have lives that they appreciate and are important to them, and that to me is incredibly important. This idea. Leonard Woolf wrote about it as well. When he was a child, he was asked to drown some puppies in a bucket of water. And he talked about, their struggle and how he looked at them, and he recognized this sense of self that they had, that he saw in himself. And I think that if everybody extended themselves and recognized that, perhaps things might change.
Certainly make us far better humans, wouldn't it? You talked about something which I could really relate to, about Chicken, about when you had her and you were cleaning out places where she'd been caching her food, how she would get visibly anxious that you were disrupting part of...
Oh, sure.
She didn't like that.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Funny, this is the room that she lived in. And when she was younger, she'd have been, here on my knee, poking at the screen and being very interested. But latterly she'd have gone, in fact, I wouldn't have been able to do this in this room if she'd still been alive, because she'd have been sitting there muttering and shouting and saying, go away, it's too much.
She lived for an astonishing amount of time. She's only just gone fairly recently.
That's in December, that's right. She was 31.
Which is amazing. Is that a record for a rook in captivity? Or
I think it is. I've never been able to find, but
I know.
And I'm always looking at the British Trust for Ornithology lists of longevity and so on. But no, I think she was pretty record breaking.
Well, let's chat a bit more about your relationship with corvids, because you of all people really know them for what they really are, rather than just written off as bad blackbirds we don't like and we don't want to garden.
Well, I mean, I know them in a particular context. I know one of it was particularly a rook and a magpie. And I've got a little crow next door. So I'm just I'm judging from these birds, and obviously from observation and so on. And they're just, it was, I owe it all to Chicken. I really do. I mean, it was, I didn't know anything about corvids when we got her. And it was just, I think, hang on, there's something here. This creature is thinking, intelligent, responsive, part of the family. And then when I started to find out more about corvid life, that is the way they live. That is the way that they live in the wild. And she was, she fitted in naturally, and until the end of her life, she recognised my daughters as her siblings. They would come home for Christmas, and even in old age, she would run out, spreading her wings and calling. And it was she knew who they were. She knew her relationship to them, and when you know that kind of thing. In fact, I don't know if you saw Channel 4 the other night. There was a clip of a Yorkshire grouse moor that a goshawk had been. They'd managed to film a gamekeeper killing a goshawk, and this was all on camera, and they then followed this up. And you see the man leaning in, they trapped the goshawk with a couple of jackdaws, and the man leans in, kills the goshawk, puts it in the sack, and then picks up the jackdaws and just chucks them away. And of course, the killing of the goshawk was ghastly, but jackdaws are most extraordinary birds. They're birds that Conrad Lorenz was the man who did all the major work on jackdaws, and he talked about them becoming engaged and marrying and being faithful for life. And people say that about birds, but it's actually not true. When they do DNA studies, it's not true. But for jackdaws, it seems to be. And again, they're astonishingly intelligent and, well, whatever you mean by intelligent, and attractive beautiful birds. And it was just this casual chucking away of these two birds who've been used to trap a goshawk who was like, you think, what is your relationship to the natural world if you can do that?
It's so out of balance, isn't it? I mean, we're just in such an incredibly unbalanced situation now that to try and rectify it is so difficult. And we're so intractable. The two sides are so entrenched in their views, and there's no discussion either way. And that's hatred built up, which is, you make no progress when it's as bad as that.
No, I mean, that's right. And I mean, again, in some respects, well, there are obvious things. The fur trade is bad. I think game shooting is appalling. But in other ways, I've tried to present, as balanced a view, things like vivisection. Well, yeah, things that were absolutely ghastly. I'm talking about historically, but things were learned. But now, I mean, it is so urgent that we change our view.
I know.
It really is. We are destroying so much. I mean, that's the other aspect of that I question about the human exceptionalism argument. Great, yeah, we're so superior and so exceptional that we have managed to destroy the one planet on which we live. No other species has done that. Congratulations.
I know, it's incredible. It's the thing that we're best at. We're brilliant at it.
That's right. And we still think that we're so superior. It is quite.
I mean, in your lifetime, you, like me, will have seen the most massive. People say, "Oh, there's still lots of birds. There's lots of this," but you will have seen just that is not the case. I mean,
oh no, the silence.
Yeah,
the silences and what people, the traditional ones talked about is insects on windscreens. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, scraping insects off my dad's car and so on. Things have changed. I mean, even in the last 20, 30 years, I mean, huge changes. I mean, there are just silences where there used to be bird song. We are killing off. We are just destroying so much.
Do you think that we have any hope? Do you think there's hope? It's a very difficult question, isn't it?
I don't know. I really don't know. Unfortunately, I think that our economic system, I think that it really doesn't. It doesn't seem to allow for any change. This continuous, relentless desire for profit by whatever means, unless it's not going to be stopped, or not at the moment.
If you end up in a party situation, not that we've got any of those anytime soon, but if you end up sitting next to somebody, let's say at a dinner party or
yeah.
and they are completely, have every type of view that is against yours. So they don't believe in any of the things you do, which is that we have to be, you know, respectful of the natural world and love animals and things. How do you tackle that? Do you just say, well, actually, you know, there's no point in reasoning with unreasonable people, or do you try to persuade them?
I'd argue. I'd argue and rant. No, I'm a dogmatic arguer and ranter.
And do you think you've actually managed to turn some of those people who are so dyed in the wool, who think they're, you know, really are above everything else?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I've come across many. I mean, there's odd encounters. You know, I had arguments with people about, say, native species, say, and that kind of thing, which, you know, is another big question. You know, what's going on? And I remember one woman who, you know, honestly, I thought she was going to kind of leap forward and bite me. She was kind of absolutely ferocious about it. I can't even remember what creature it was that, you know, she insisted was, you know, a native species and had to be protected. And I was arguing with her, and I thought, what is this? It was a very strange moment, I have to say.
What is your view on the, to go to native species, what is your view on the situation with the red squirrel, grey squirrel? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I dealt with that in Field Notes Maiden City.
Yeah.
Very interesting, because I mean, you know more about it than I do, but is there fossil evidence for red squirrels in Scotland? I'm not sure that there is. And
no, there isn't. There isn't.
No, that's right. And
never been here.
Yeah,
well,
and
no.
The idea of, I mean, when one talks about native species and what should be here and what shouldn't, we're talking about a moment in time. We're talking about a very short time frame. And it amuses me greatly, you know, this great thing about, you know, again, how iconic the red squirrel is. Highland squirrel clubs used to, you know, batter the hell out of red squirrels and cut off their tails for bounty for years. I mean, they were forest pests, they were everything that was wrong. But when the political moment arrives when you want to have an iconic species to represent your country, there they are. And it's to me, you know, a lot of it is very political. Stephen Jay Gould wrote a lot about this, you know, about the kind of political nature of the argument about native species and how wrong it was. And I mean, I tend to agree, because, again, a lot of the language that surrounds it is vastly racist and xenophobic, and, you know, with non-native species being used in a way that, you know, suggests all manner of other things about our society, which are not good.
It doesn't show us in a good light. I mean, I think the red squirrel, grey squirrel thing is slightly different in that we're in the areas where the grey are really causing terrible problems for the reds, and the reds are dying out. That is a serious issue, and that's a worry. But, you know, talking about non-native species, all these pheasants in the environment, you don't hear too much.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you know,
they're acceptable, but yet to bring the sea eagle back is an absolute nightmare. So, you know, there's lots of problems with that. So we're very fickle, aren't we, as human beings?
Yes, that's right. I mean, reintroductions and rewilding, very, very interesting one. And I mean, I was thinking about it when I was thinking, you know, about wolves, and I was thinking, I'd worry for the wolves. You know?
Oh, I would too, definitely.
Really kind of think.
And our roads are so busy as well. I mean, there's so much traffic now. The country's getting smaller and smaller, and, you know, wildlife is really up against it, forgetting persecution and illegal persecution. It's up against it with, you know, habitat loss and industrialization on the roads. I mean, it's hard to keep positive, and we've got to keep positive. And I want to remind everybody that your book, although it sounds like there's a lot of darkness in it, there is, but there's all this light as well. And it is also, it's something that we need to know. I mean, all the things you've said in your book, we should know about these things. I think it's important.
I'd like to think it's a book about, you know, our love for other species. I mean, I did go very easy on the, you know, the horror stuff. I mean, there was, you know, a lot more and a lot worse. But that's not that, you know, you need to hint at it for people to get the full picture. But it really is about what, you know, what we must do to look at the world. You know, I mean, it would improve our lives so much if we saw other species as equal to ourselves. That's all.
Yeah. I should tell people too that when they pick it up, I defy anybody not to have a good laugh at our relationship with dogs and how you describe all the stuff that goes with dogs, pet, sort of these enormous pet industries with all sorts of gadgets for dogs and, you know, lots of rubbish that you can buy for your dog. You're very, very funny about that too. I mean, but I mean, we have done a lot of weird things with dogs too, haven't we? I mean, by breeding them, that they have all these health problems, and you know, it's mad.
It's absolutely crazy. I mean, particularly some of the American websites, you know, the things you can. And there was one. It was a fair to sell, you know, stuff to the pet industry. I've never seen. Just astonishing, you know, the whirlpool bars. What dog requires a whirlpool? There is one, but I mean, astonishing things. You know, the psychopharmaceuticals, you know, antidepressants for dogs, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I really laughed out loud at some of that description. And again, you're clever at weaving it in when you've been talking about some things which were quite hard to take. It's a really wonderful book. And I think that kind of brought us to the end. We didn't seem to have any questions, but maybe that's because everybody was so busy listening to you. Fascinating as ever. I would have liked to have talked a lot more about crows, definitely, but we'll have to save that for another time. So thank you. It was a most thought-provoking event, and as ever, it's been a huge pleasure to talk to you.
It's so nice to talk to you. Thank you.
It is a really, really important book, and it's widely available in every good bookshop, I hope, and it'll certainly change the way you think. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Talk to you, Esther. And may I wish you all the very best with this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks very much.